Good evening, everybody. Good evening to all of you who are here joining us in person and to all of you who are joining us on Zoom. We are delighted to have you at the center. My name is Abby Levina. I am the Executive Director here at the Malfi Center. First things first, just a little about the center. We have been around for the last 40 years. In the community, we are an independent nonprofit organization that facilitates community conversations and interfaith connections. We continue that tradition tonight. Sent to Bergen-Belsen as a child, Dr. Fenichel was liberated along with his mother in 1944, the year before Anne Frank died in the same concentration camp. He is joining us virtually to share his story. I would like to introduce Matthew Sullivan, our host, and Reverend Ethan Stark, our co-host for the evening. Matthew graduated St. Norbert College, summa cum laude in 2019. He is a congregant and ritual committee member at Congregation Knesset Israel, Green Bay's local synagogue, and co-sponsor for this event. Larry is here. So thank you, Larry, and the synagogue. Matthew has been a self-taught Holocaust scholar with a specialization in Auschwitz-Birkenau camp complex. Matthew has previously collaborated with the Holocaust Education Resource Center in Milwaukee to annotate survivor testimonies and has been privileged to teach at the college level. He is presently engaged in the completion of a doggedly researched work of historical fiction, which he expects to finish later this year at a length of 1,300 pages. Ethan is an ordained clergy of the Throth, an inclusive heathen educational organization, where he has assisted in advancing their clergy program. Additionally, he has sat as the co-administrator for Heathens Against Hate, where among other duties, he managed public relations, has led educational workshops and grassroots initiatives. He has lectured on several occasions as part of the Parliament of World Religion, along with leading interreligious conversations and engagements. He is the Pagan Chair for the Foundation for Religious Diplomacy. He currently resides in Appleton, Wisconsin, where between metal fabrication, music, and raising his family, continues his interfaith work in his community. Please help me welcome Matthew up to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Before we welcome Dr. Fenichel to the screen, I would like to share with you some of the historical context surrounding his story of survival. In May of 1940, Nazi Germany launched an invasion of the Netherlands, then a neutral country, in combination with simultaneous attacks on Belgium and France. Within 5 days, the Nazis' invasion of the Netherlands was complete, trapping an additional 140,000 Jews in Nazi-occupied territory. By the end of that year, Nazi German race laws had defined for the Dutch people who was and was not Aryan, who was and was not a Jew. All Jewish civil servants were removed from their positions in government, and all Jewish-owned businesses required to register themselves as such, one of the first steps in a process of Aryanization, whereby the Nazis would later plunder Jewish families of their assets. In February of 1941, and in protest of a then recent attack on Dutch Jews by the Nazis, the Communist Party of the Netherlands called for a general strike, effectively shutting down the economy of the capital city of Amsterdam. Civilian protesters were thereupon dispersed by the Germans through the use of firearms and hand grenades. By May, the Jewish star had been introduced in the Netherlands. Deportations of Jews were handled by high-ranking Nazi officials answerable directly to Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler. These and other criminals succeeded in co-opting the existing Dutch civil administration, thus enabling the Nazis to dictate by decree rather than by force. Even the Jewish Council of Amsterdam, in fact, was duped into believing that the Nazis would deport only foreign Jews, such as the thousands of refugees who had previously fled into the Netherlands from Germany. However, 107,000 of the Netherlands' 140,000 Jews were eventually deported, more than 75%. I would ask you now to please hold on to this number, 107,000 persons, as it will again become important to us later. For now, I'd like to pivot to address the organization of the Nazi camp system. As when we hear a term like transit camp, we may be reminded more of a train station or perhaps of an airport terminal than we are of a prison. And while, yes, such camps were used primarily to move persons from one place to another, their destinations were decidedly unpleasant. The more than 40,000 camps established across Europe during the reign of the Third Reich can be described as belonging to one of three categories: forced labor and concentration camps, extermination camps, and the aforementioned transit camps. Westerbork, where Dr. Fenichel spent a part of his imprisonment, belonged to this latter category. It was a transit camp. Nearly 100,000 Jews passed through Westerbork during its years of operation, with most staying for only 1 week before their deportation to a different destination. Understand also that Westerbork served as a major transit hub for departures to two of the most notorious Nazi killing centers, Auschwitz and Sobibor. Within the span of just over a year, for instance, roughly 43,000 Jews arrived to Auschwitz from Westerbork. Only 85 of these persons managed to survive the war. Not 85%, mind, but 85. Of 43,000 deportees, only 85 of them survived. That's less than 1/4 of 1%. We should identify, furthermore, one final category of camp, what was referred to in his own words as a residence camp established on the orders of Heinrich Himmler himself. In late 1942, a number of Palestinian Jews living in Poland had been successfully exchanged for German settlers, then considered enemy aliens by the British government of Mandatory Palestine. This would inspire the Nazis to expand Bergen-Belsen, a camp formerly established to incarcerate Allied prisoners of war, into something more. It was Himmler's belief that certain Jews could become valuable hostages, again, his words, able to be held for ransom. To that end, conditions in the expanded Bergen-Belsen camp complex were meant to be improved over those of the average concentration camp, not due out of any humanitarian concerns, but rather to the simple fact that dead hostages do not hold their value. In typical Nazi fashion, moreover, the reason Belsen was chosen as a holding site was as a result of its ability to be easily integrated into the broader network of the Nazi camp system. In other words, if keeping Jews for hostage and exchange ever became more trouble than it's worth, they could quickly be transported elsewhere. And lamentably, that was, in some cases, exactly what happened. Of these several thousand exchange Jews imprisoned at Belsen throughout its existence, few were ever released. An example: in April of 1943, 3,000 Polish Jews were tricked out of hiding, having been promised safe passage to South America by the Germans. 1,800 of these persons were interned at Bergen-Belsen. 6 months later, on October 23rd, 1943, they arrived to Auschwitz-Birkenau, whereupon each and every one of them was murdered. Everyone, I tell you this in order to impress upon you just how exceptional it is that Dr. Fenichel survived his imprisonments at both Westerbork and Belsen. You will please recall that 107,000 Jews were deported from the Netherlands over the course of the Second World War. And this is the number which earlier I had asked for you to keep present in your minds. So, of those 107,000 human beings, only 5,200 of them survived the war. 5,200, that's fewer than 5%. Dr. Henry Fenichel was born in the Netherlands in 1938 and immigrated to the United States in 1953. He is a professor emeritus of physics from the University of Cincinnati, where he taught for 40 years. Dr. Fenichel is an intellect. He is also an inspiration. Nevertheless, he was not safe at Westerbork. He was not safe at Bergen-Belsen. Dr. Fenichel triumphs today as an intellect and as an inspiration. And that, I think we can all agree, is nothing short of a miracle. I hope you all join me now in welcoming him to speak with us tonight and in thanking him for his courage in continuing to bear witness. What's this?
You just like Dr. Fenichel.
Oh, yes, of course. Dr. Fenichel, we're ready for you.
Is it my turn to start?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I'll have to memorize some of those things for future presentations. Anyway, I hope to keep this to on the order of 40 or so minutes. Summary of my presentation, I'll tell you about the story in Holland, hiding, captured, what happened in camp, and the miracle by which my mother and I survived and ended up eventually in the United States. When you Google or search the number of people who perished in World War II, between 70 and 80 million people perished, if you include what happened in China, Japan, and what have you. So out of those, for the topic we're discussing today, 6 million Jews were perished. But all of these are just numbers. But if you look at the numbers, I don't know if you see on the top right, about 14% of the Soviet Union, 23 million people perished, 20 million in China, about 4%, and so on down the line. So the point is, these are numbers, but each one of those numbers is an individual, a person, has a future. And so I will concentrate now on just one such number, one person, namely myself. So this is, in the good old days, the 1930s, we didn't have these fancy cameras running around or cell phones or internet. So it's hard to find pictures, but I was able to find a photograph of my parents on their wedding day. I have no idea who these kids are. They were married in 1935 in Holland, in the Netherlands. By the way, the name of the country is the Netherlands. Holland is just one of the provinces. Amsterdam is the New York City equivalent, and The Hague is the Washington, D.C. equivalent, and I was born in The Hague. Anyway, they got married. They lived in, maybe I should say something about their background. Neither of them was born in Holland. They were both born in Poland. My mother was born in a small village, Uszew, in Poland, which small family. On the other hand, a small town, but she was one of 12 brothers and sisters. And they didn't even have a high school in town or local school. So she had to go to another village nearby to go to school, graduate from high school. When she graduated, she decided this place is very confining. And she and a cousin picked up, imagine that in the late 1920s or 30s, picking up as an 18, 19-year-old person and going to Holland. My father was also born in Poland in Tarnow, which was the largest city, and his family, when he was an infant, moved to Berlin, Germany, and had a business running there, I think, stuff that had to do with, I'm not so sure about the details, but might be with smoking or other issues like that. So anyway, the Nazis start World War II. The first thing they do in Germany before the war starts is kicking out the Jews from Germany and rounding them up. And here you have a Jewish couple. My father's family, Fenichel, had a business in Amsterdam, in Berlin, Germany, and they took it away. And so the family decided it's time to move. Who's the family? His parents, my grandparents, and brother and sister. The kids were all more or less in their, the kids were, I'm sorry, his brother, he had a brother and sister who were already in their 20s. So they decided it's time to leave Berlin. They still had an opportunity in the early mid-30s to leave the country, and they decided to move to British control Palestine, whose rent his brother and sister, who were in their 20s, and his parents. And he says, you know, I want to see the world. I'd like to go to Holland, Belgium, France, and then I'll join you. Well, from this picture, you can see he ended up in Holland, married this gorgeous woman, and I came along. And let me just move my page. So, and when I came along, we lived in The Hague. We lived on the second story of a typical Dutch brownstone house, 3 stories. And I found a few pictures of myself. I'm sorry. Of myself. Again, we didn't have cameras or and I found a picture of myself playing with my friends. I'm the cute one on the left side. And this is the only family picture that I have. And so that's the only picture I have of myself, my mother, and myself, okay? I'm sorry, I'm getting into trouble here. I'm sorry, little technical problems here, but okay, anyway, so I'll come back to the war. So they got married, I got born, we live in The Hague. Life was good. You saw the apartment, and so anyway, comes 1940s, as you heard before in the presentation. The Nazis invaded Holland. I found this in one of the history books. And initially, they did nothing. They didn't round up the Jews. They just slowly took over running the place. And not many of the Dutch people did not object to this whole thing, that partly because the Dutch and the German are similar languages. And at the same time, in 1940, the Nazis were busy fighting the Russians on the east, and that was a good thing to do. So anyway, they took over, and some of the Dutch people accepted it. So nothing happened in the beginning. All of a sudden, after a few weeks, the cop on the street corner, instead of being a Dutch cop, is now a Nazi cop, German or a Dutch who cooperated with them. And unfortunately, many Dutch people also participated in this game. It took a year later before restrictions were put on the Jews, and this is a summary of restrictions. So a year later, in May 41, Jews are not allowed to possess wireless. What's wireless? They didn't have the internet those days, but it was shortwave radio. And what you had is your shortwave radio that allows you to listen to what's happening outside in the world. And just as an aside, the Voice of America was transmitted a few miles away where I'm sitting now in Cincinnati. A few miles north, the Voice of America was transmitted. It's no longer transmitting from there, but it's a nice little museum. If you're in the neighborhood, you may want to come and see it. A little bit later, membership in Jewish Jews are not permitted in non-Jewish organizations. Jews are not allowed in other schools. You have to be to council school. Then at some point, they have to have a new ID. You know, we are lucky in this country that we don't have to carry with us an ID. I guess our driver's license is an ID, but not true in many parts of the world. In any case, comes a day and they said you have to get new ID papers. So you go to the town office and you get a new ID paper. And if you happen to be Jewish, they put a J on it. No big deal, we're not ashamed that we are Jews, but step by step, another year later, you have to start wearing a yellow star, and so on down the line. ID paper. This is an ID paper that's for my mother, and it has a J on it, and then a little later we had to get yellow stars and wear those. And then after a while, so slowly but surely, they discovered who is a Jew and who isn't in time to be able to round them up later. So a year and a half after they invaded, they started rounding up. And even that was reasonably clever. What they did is they rounded up men, Jewish men, to go to labor camps. Supposedly, they're being rounded up to work in Nazi camps. It almost sounds reasonable, right? There's a war going on. You need to have laborers to run the place in the camps. So you round up your enemy manpower. That's the point at which my father was taken away. I was the only child, by the way. And, but of course, he wasn't taken into a labor camp. He was taken to Auschwitz, from which he never returned. That's where he died. After a while, they started to round up not just men, but women, children, babies, grandparents. Do you need those in labor camp? Obviously, at that point, you know this is all suspicious. That's the point at which more people started to go into hiding, escape, or see what they can do. And as you heard before, you're familiar with the Anne Frank story. Anne Frank, her family went into hiding in a loft above a store that they owned in Amsterdam. My mother and I went into hiding in The Hague, not Amsterdam, in an infirmary and a child care center. I would play with the kids on the first floor. If suspicious characters would come, my mother would be upstairs on the second floor training some kind of illness or disease. You're familiar with Anne Frank working on her story. This was me working on my story at the time. And I'll tell you later how it's going to end up in terms of storytelling. And so once I retired as a physicist, I said, how much what I'm remembering really happened? So I decided it's time to go back and trace what happened. I went to Holland, I went to Germany, and one of the things that I discovered was a document of me. Remember, at that point, during this war, I'm between the ages of 4 and 6. And normally children are on the parents' record. But this is me, my name, Heinrich. In The Hague, the Westerbork 84 is the address of the brownstone that I showed you a little while ago. Then we were in Amsterdam for a while, and this address, up on the top right, 15 May 1943, we were in Westerbork, taken to Westerbork, that you heard, that supposedly was a transit camp between the Netherlands and East. And this is Bergen-Belsen, 1st February 1944, that my mother and I were transferred from Westerbork to Bergen-Belsen. Incredible, you know, the records they have. I mean, when people ask me, what do you say to people who deny the Holocaust? I say, whenever they deny the Holocaust, their heroes, the Nazis, are turning in their graves. They were proud of what they were doing. They were going to and they kept records of what they were doing. They're going to get rid of the riffraff, the Jews, foreigners, immigrants, and stuff like that. Anyway, back to the story. While we were in Amsterdam, before Westerbork, we were placed for a while in a theater. And I remember at that point being in a theater, we were sleeping on the front benches. After the war, they decided to tear down that building, but they kept the front facade, and the area in the back is now a museum. And I was there a few years ago looking in, and as you come in, they have a list of all the Jewish people, or all the people who stayed there, who were there for a period of time during the war. I'm pointing at my name, and a little bit over here. Anne Frank is further down up there. And let me just do one second. So we ended up in Westerbork. Now, Westerbork was not a death camp, and it was just a place to accumulate and round up Dutch citizens for shipment further east. In fact, the inside operation of the camp was run by a Jewish committee of leaders. I mean, there was a fence running around. You couldn't go in and out, but the inside looked pretty decent. I was in my mother's barrack, nice, clean, triple-decker. The people inside looked halfway decent. However, once a week, every Tuesday morning, they rounded up on the order of 1,000 people, between 800 and 1,200, on a train station, loaded up on cattle cars, shipped east, most of whom never returned. What's going on here? Why is that? Anyway, the shipped east, I seem to have lost some access to. Hey, let me stop for a second. Okay, I lost a bunch of slides. Anyway, so at one point, my mother and I we were shipped off to Bergen-Belsen and eventually saved. So let me take a break here and go through the miracle by which we survived. While all of this is going on, and in fact, starting about 100 years earlier in the late 1800s, German citizens, Christians from southern Germany, decided that it's important for Christians to reside in the Holy Land. And so they were sent emissaries who lived there for a while, then they come back and they set up a whole bunch of villages were developed. If you go to Jerusalem today, one of the suburbs is called the German colony. And excuse me. And one of the areas that they lived in was in the suburbs. There were a few villages, mostly farming villages, but also it helped the city. They built another village on the outskirts of Jaffa, which today is Tel Aviv. City father decided to keep that village, And if you go to Israel now, to Tel Aviv, you can see you have this little island which has cafes, restaurant, and tells the story of the Templars going in. I found this pictures of the Templars in 1910 in dedicating in school in Savannah, this area near Tel Aviv. Look at them, they're dressed formally with ties and hat, proper, in this country which has just donkeys and camels running around. Anyway, that's what they brought in to the Holy Land. Talking about the Holy Land and all the stuff you hear today about the Middle East, I think you should remember that before World War I, there were no countries in the Middle East. The whole thing was controlled by Turkey, the Ottoman Empire. After World War I, the British and the French took over the Middle East. By the way, on the left here, I don't know if you can see my arrow pointing, but on the left it's Cyprus, that's the Mediterranean, and Turkey owed all the land to the right. The British decided and the French decided to take over Syria, Lebanon, Iraq was on here, Persia was part of the game. This is the Jordan River. More about it in a minute. The east side of the Jordan River became Jordan, Transjordan. And on the west side, it became Palestine, and it was run by the British. So the mess we have in the Middle East today, these damn British didn't know how to draw borders, but that's a different one. You know, the story I have is very serious, but the only way I can live with it if you put some levity into it. I can't just spend every day crying about what happened to me. Okay, so here we are in Westerbork, and my mother learned about a possible change of populations with Palestine. Or I should say something before the exchange is that, so this was the picture after World War I. World War II starts, the villages of German citizens residing in British-controlled Palestine. When the war started, many of the German men went back to Germany to fight for the cause. Why? It makes no sense to me, but then you had Jewish friends, Christian friends, you lived in Palestine. Why would you go back and fight for the Nazis? But they did. Okay, remember Palestine was run by the British. This is now in the 1940s. And the British then rounded up the men that didn't go and shipped them off to Australia, where they're still today. If you go to Melbourne, Australia, you'll find the German Templar colony. So here you have, after they went to Germany, a few hundred women and children in British-controlled Palestine who wanted to go back to Germany. Somebody said, you have Germans in Palestine who want to go back to Germany. You've got to find people from Palestine and Germany who want to go back to Palestine. Such exchanges take place occasionally. Like if the Allies had captured a few hundred soldiers, Nazi soldiers, and the Nazis captured a few Allied soldiers, every now and then during the war, we'll stop the fighting for 2 or 3 hours, exchange those people, and go back to fighting. And Bergen-Belsen was originally meant to be a place where they would keep such potential people for exchange. Anyway, clearly, if you want to find people from Palestine in Germany during the war, there are hardly any of those. So the Germans allowed for lists to be created of people with a connection to Palestine. And as I mentioned to you before, my father's family was at that point in Palestine. So what my mother do, who she had to bribe and how to get it, to try, she found out that there's a list of people with a connection to Palestine, and she got us on such a list. And one day, while we were still in Westerbork, we get this card from the Red Cross from Switzerland, and it says, "This is to inform Pastor Fenichel, my mother and son, that we have a good chance of being on the exchange list." My mother takes these things, we're in Westerbork, runs to the commander's office, and the front office says, "Looks like we're going to be on an exchange." He says, "What do you mean, She says, "It's official, it's Red Cross, there's Red Cross here, it has a stamp in there, the signature." No, it doesn't have any numbers. You know, the Nazis, how ridiculous. As you may know, people who survived Auschwitz have numbers tattooed on their arm. Anyway, nothing happens. Word goes back, they want numbers. They want numbers. About 2 months later, we get another form, lots more words in it, and it has a number in it. That's my number on the bottom left side. Anyway, this is then, what happened is, so this is Westerbork. Then on one of the Tuesday mornings, the third one down the list, and the third one down the list that I showed earlier, we had to load it up on a train, and we ended up in Bergen-Belsen. The Tuesday morning trains, by the way, this is the train list. It started in 1944. Okay, that was a few years after when they started to organize, and ships. We were on the third one. This is 11 January 44. A week later, 1844. The fourth one, 1st February 1944, we went to Bergen-Belsen. First we went to Bergen-Belsen, to Rasenstadt, Auschwitz, and so on. Anyway, so we ended up in Bergen-Belsen. I guess you have seen enough pictures of Bergen-Belsen that I don't need to discuss it or emphasize it very. It's a terrible place, but it was not a death camp. There were no gas chambers there, but hundreds and thousands of people perished simply from hunger and malnutrition and diseases. People ask me, what I remember about Bergen-Belsen, and one of the things that I remember is that let me see. Oh no, one more thing. Now that we are in Germany, God forbid that we would wear a yellow star which has the name German in Dutch, so that we have to take that one off and put this one on. How do you make these things? You just take a big sheet, put stamps on it, cut them out. My mother, a good Dutch woman, made sure that I cut it carefully and I kept it clean. I remember the normal morning roll call where we were given our food. The food was, we had a little dish, metal dish, a round dish, and there was this big pail, like a garbage pail on the side, which had some slop in it, and we were given some of that slop, soup, I guess, and some black bread. And after the meal, they had the few kids in there clean up those barrels. In retrospect, I think there was not a punishment. They figured maybe we can find a few more potato peels in the bottom. And my mother, who is a good traditional Jewish person, asked me every day to take that black bread that we have and take a little piece of off it, keep it on the side, so we would have a little extra on Friday night to celebrate the Sabbath. That was going to be our Holocaust, celebrating the church. That's how you keep your senses, what can I say? So, let's see. What's happening now? Why don't I? Keep moving. There we go, okay. Anyway, as I said, there were no death camps, gas camps, but lots of people died. In the summer of 1945, when the Allies, the British, came and captured Bergen-Belsen, we left before that time, they found this pile of shoes of people who didn't make it. Anne Frank's shoes are among those. Yep. Anyway, let me go on. We were in Bergen-Belsen, as you saw before, 1st of February. We were there about 6 months. In June, we were loaded up once we had the paperwork on a train to be part of the exchange. 222 Dutch Jews, mostly older people and a few kids. This is just a picture of a typical train in Europe, and we were in cabins. It was not a cattle car that brings you to the camp. And you know, the cabin, you have a bench on one side, maybe another one on one side, and during the night you slide these beds together and you can sleep. Well, if you have 3 people here and 2 or 3 here, then and you slept there, it's kind of tight at night. Luggage we didn't have, so every night they tied me up on the luggage rack. That's what I remember as a 6-year-old from that journey to away from the war. I remember once at one railroad station or stop, there was a peasant, a woman with a dish with cherries, humongous cherries, whether it's trying to sell it to us or give it to us, I don't know, but these cherries as big as apples. Cherries are not as big as apples, but to me, a kid who hasn't seen fresh fruit for the previous 2 years, that's the memory that I have of that experience. Again, a quick comment of geography. This up on the top left, you see France. Next to it is Belgium, Holland. Up on top, Amsterdam over there. Bergen-Belsen is not that far in Germany. And the train goes all the way down there to the Orient Express. And the actual exchange was done in Istanbul on the crossing on the shores of the Black Sea. By the way, that is still is useful today, right? The fighting in Syria, Lebanon, other places with people are getting killed and try to escape, they go on this train in the other direction to freedom in Europe. Different lecture. So here we are. This is a typical exchange of ferries on the Bosphorus in Turkey. We were on one ferry going to the right to Asia, and the other folks, I was part of 222 people. The German folks were going left to Asia. I think we got the better deal than a better deal. So, what do I want to say? Okay, so anyway, we ended up in Palestine, and I found a copy of the announcement that we arrived. I found a document that listed all the passengers, and on the second page, on the top, my name appears, Fenichel-Heinrich. I was Heinrich then, today it's Henry. And just below me, number 52 is Fenichel, my mother, Fischler, her maiden name, and her birth dates. And I'm furious with my mother. The train took us across Syria, down Lebanon, into Palestine along the coast. And what did the British do? They put us in a camp. But that was not a concentration camp. You know, the British figured, here you have these 222 people, try and make sure we're healthy, check our health, check our connection, and so forth. And of course, we need to get a new ID. So this is the ID that we got. It's run by the country is run by the British Palestine. It says the government of Palestine in English, Arabic, and Hebrew. Department of Migration, English, Arabic, and Hebrew. This is to certify that Fenichel-The, Paula, and son Heinrich are now residents of Palestine. Actually, I didn't look that terrible, but you see, this proves that I'm a Palestinian. But that's a different way to look at the story. And in their wisdom, they decided to separate us. My mother was sent to live, I guess she was ill, sent to live with my father's sister, who was married and lived in Tel Aviv, had some kids. And I was sent to a children's home in a village on the northern part of the country, on the Mediterranean coast, close to the Lebanese border. That was like a children's home. No, it was not unusual. Those days, the collective farms where lots of people lived together. So anyway, us people, we were in a small village. It's called Naria. It's a city today. We went to the elementary school, and this was the sort of our dormitory. My mother came and visited me often, vacations and what have you. I would be with her. And why am I proud? Yeah. Why is my next slide not showing up? There we are. Okay, what do I remember from that village? I remember a small shed outside that was a ice cream parlor. Nowadays, a few years later, it became the picture on the bottom, and nowadays I understand it's a skyscraper built there. But my mother, when she came to see me, would take me there to visit us. Some of the things that I remember about the trip, the home that I lived in, Haria, was on the coast. Every now and then at night, there would be a boat with, quote, illegal immigrants coming, and they would take the kids and bring them to the home, and we would take them in. What I mean by illegal, you know, after World War II, a lot of Jewish families from Europe had no place to stay anymore, so they left. And where would they want to go? One of the places they heard of is the Holy Land, which will supposedly be our home. Needless to say, the British controlled that. So occasionally, if you were not permitted legally, they would go on a freight boat or whatever, what have you, and were able to sneak into the country. And they did this at night. And overnight, the kids would be dropped in our home. The next morning, British soldiers would come and say, these kids weren't here last night. And we'd say, of course they were. And they would smile. They knew what was going on, and they allowed it to happen. Anyway, this is now approaching 1940s, late 40s. More and more Jews arrive in the Holy Land, and there seems to be a pressure to create a new Jewish state. The United Nations recommended, you know what, why don't we take the country and break it into two parts? Where the Jews live, we call Israel, and where the Palestinians live, or the Arabs live, we'll call Palestine. as part of doing this, they sent a commission to decide which part, who should get what piece of land. And they happened to stop by near where I was in the home at the time. And this guy on the right is my hero. His name is Chaim Weizmann. He is a scientist who in World War One helped the British in the war effort during the time. And so he rose up within England and they made him the first president of the new state of Israel. And there's a scientific institution, the Weizmann Institute, which in fact I've spent a sabbatical doing some work there. But again, it's a different lecture. I got to move on. So after that traveling and creating a new state is born. And let me describe the description of the state. So look at the picture on the left. All the way on the left is the Mediterranean Sea. All the way on the right, the white part is the Jordan River, Sea of Galilee on the top, Dead Sea on the bottom, and it's connected in a line by the Jordan River. And so, and down on the bottom here is Egypt. The Jews were given all that blue stuff, and the Palestinians were given the green West Bank, Gaza Strip, and all of that pink stuff. For all I know, the Palestinians accepted it, but the neighbors didn't. And Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Iraq, Iran invaded the country on the picture on the right, driving the Jews to the sea. Well, it didn't work for them. Not only did they not drive the Jews to the sea, they lost all that pink stuff. So the country of the Middle East, Israel, including the pink stuff and the blue one, and the West Bank is run by the Palestinian, and this is the Gaza Strip, and who knows what the news will be tomorrow about the Gaza Strip. Come on, move to the next slide. I'm having some technical trouble here. Don't know. There we go. Okay. Okay, now I'm back again to try and bring this to some conclusion. Anyway, so I'm moving now. So in 1944, I arrived in British-controlled Palestine. In 1947, 48, it becomes a state, a Jewish state called Israel. And at that point, my mother remarries, and a stepfather who lives in Tel Aviv area on the third floor up there. It's an upscale neighborhood in Tel Aviv. Now, my stepfather life was rough in Israel, you know, still a war going on, and the stepfather had two brothers in the United States, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. And so he decided, and they invited him to come to the United States. They said, sidewalks are paved with gold. Why don't you do that? Oh, how can you resist that? So we hopped on the boat, January 1953. I am 15 years old at that point, and we went on a maiden voyage of a ship by the name of Andrea Doria. She represented the rebirth of the Italian merchant marine. Of course, she sank a few years later. My wife says that a cat has 9 lives, so I guess I still have a few more to go. You arrive in the New York Harbor, Statue of Liberty on the left, skyscrapers on the right, and on a small black and white TV, Eisenhower gives his inaugural speech. We come in, they find a place for us in Brooklyn. Brooklyn. That's a city in Cincinnati, in Holland, and so they I stay in Brooklyn. I guess I ought to bring this to an end. I stay in Brooklyn. I went to high school in Brooklyn. I went to Brooklyn College, which was free if you had the right grades. That's where I met my lovely wife, Diana, and we got married. And I went to Rutgers University graduate school, got myself a PhD in physics, and ended up getting a job at the University of Cincinnati. My professional expertise was a low temperature physicist, condensed matter physics, solid state physics. I had a laboratory. I supervised graduate students for their degree and taught freshman physics, as you always do. Maybe I'll conclude with 2 or 3 more slides. One of them is a poem written by an anti-Nazi Jewish, Nazi theologian, a Lutheran, and he says they came in Germany, they came first for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. And then you had more of these, and then they came for me. By that time, there was nobody left to speak up. And when I make this presentation typically in high schools or what have you, I tell them it's important to be an upstander, not a bystander. And I remind also people that not all Germans were Nazis. Unfortunately, too many Germans were bystanders, allowing the Nazis to do that. And maybe one more slide. Due to Elie Wiesel, what hurts the victim most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander. And again, give a message not to be a bystander. When I do it on high school, I tell the kids, you see something happening, fighting in your classroom, try and stop it. And later on in life, vote for the right politicians. So after I retired, I said, what else do I do now? I stopped writing equations on the board. And in Cincinnati, we have a fantastic museum center in what used to be once the main train station downtown. And a part of it is the museum. It has a section of Holocaust of a museum of Holocaust and humanity and so forth on. So what I do now, I volunteer my life over there. And one final other thing that has happened is about a year and a half ago, a group of folks came from the Jewish Foundation in California, Los Angeles, I guess Hollywood, and they set me down for a week, 6, 7 hours every day, and I had to sit in the same position, wear the same thing, and ask me questions and questions and questions and questions. And then I took this and created this dimension and testimony personality. So if you come to that museum we have here in Cincinnati downtown, you can talk to me and I respond in my own voice. An example of AI, artificial intelligence, working in a positive way. Well, let me finally say, the one thing that this one does, remember when I showed you a picture of Anne Frank writing her writing in her summary biography, and I was working on mine. At this point, I don't need to write a biography anymore. You can just come over here and ask me questions, and I will answer. Thank you for listening to me. This is the family today, just as an aside. Thank you.
Dr. Fenichel, first of all, again, thank you so much. I wanted, before we open the questions up to the floor here, I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned Dutch collaborators when the Nazis came into the Netherlands, and you also spoke about the dangers that can be posed by, your neighbors becoming bystanders. My question to you is, as a child, what was the first anti-Jewish measure that you can remember, and how did your neighbors react to that?
I think I was relatively well protected, it started between the ages of 4 and 6. When we went into hiding, I was with other kids, so it was all a positive neighborhood. The only thing possible is wearing the yellow star. Other than that, I didn't know anything about the politics or what have you. I was just fortunate that I had an incredible mother who was able to take care of me and says, this too shall pass. And our father, he shall come back someday, until she ended up discovering before we left that he was killed.
Thank you.
Dr. Fenichel, first of all, thank you very much. I don't know what I'm looking up. Sorry. Thank you very much for being with us. And
No problem.
as a grandson of a Holocaust survivor, I know that there are a lot of survivors out there who could not share their stories owed to the trauma that they had suffered. And I'm impressed that you were part of the Dimensions of Testimony, because it had dawned on me as I was driving here that Matthew and I's generation is probably going to be the last generation that is able to speak to survivors in person. And neither my daughter will be able to do that. And so having your testimony recorded for future generations is really important. And I'm looking around the room right now, and I'm noticing a particular age demographic. And I guess my question is, and this is a little bit tricky to answer on the off the cuff, but how can I get younger people in this room? What might you be able to impart to us in order to bring people and raise more awareness and get more people, younger people, engaged in even wanting to listen to a story? This story is necessary, but the desire is perhaps unfortunately lacking.
Well, that's difficult. As I said, my job in giving the presentation is to bear witness that it happened. And the Nazis created a document that I showed you in the presentation of what they did to me. And it's just unreal. What is it about us as human beings that we need to fight each other, to have these wars? Lots of people fight. Open up your newspaper today and there's a fight, an army fighting somewhere else. Don't understand that. But I know we have that in our history, right? If you look at the Bible, the Old Testament, you have tribe A fighting tribe B or what have you. They did it then too. I have no recommendation other than discuss situations such as mine and indicate and see The terrible things it is. I mean, I survived, great. So nothing happened to me, but I lost my father. I lost the possibility of having brothers and sisters. I just was fortunate that my mother and I survived, and that we did not, and we ended up living in Bergen-Belsen, not being one of those shoes that you saw on the pile of shoes there.
תודה רבה.
A lot of
Right, so audience here, if anybody has a question, you'd like to chime in? Yes, ma'am.
Because you two are in that generation, I'd like to throw that question back to you. How can your generation influence your generation to be interested in history like this?
Well, I share Dr. Fenichel's sentiment that that's a very tricky question. But I think predominantly, I think the answer that I would give is to leverage new technologies and to meet young people where they are. I think that the testimony that Dr. Fenichel has given I assume it was the Shoah Foundation, is an excellent way to start that conversation. I also think that maybe there needs to be more of an effort to combat denial. I know that on a lot of social media platforms these days, that's a very common problem. And I don't know if there's a way to combat that without running counter-programming to make sure that people are aware of what happened. Ethan, going on that one?
I've done a few lectures on extremism and about cultural appropriation of extremism, and a lot of the times you have to explain what something is not before you can explain what something is, and it's really difficult. It's really difficult, and it creates a much larger conversation that is very difficult to do on social media platforms or online because it's reactionary. It's reactionary. It's one-sided. There's a lot of knee-jerk reactions. There's no logic involved.
It's emotional. It's purely emotional.
Getting people in the room face to face when you are not protected behind a screen is what's crucial. And the only social media avenue that should be taken, in my opinion at least, is to, like Matthew had said, get the word out, to bring people to face-to-face events, because I've seen documentaries on the Holocaust. I've seen fictional films about the Holocaust. When I walked under the Al-Bekmach flag sign in Auschwitz, where my grandmother was, and being there with hundreds of students behind me, and it's gravel underneath your feet, and you close your eyes, and all you hear is thousands of footsteps behind you, that transports you greater than any documentary, greater than any book. And so getting people in the room to be confronted right then and there with the reality is really a hard thing to do, but that's the necessity that we're trying to find.
I have a comment on it.
Please, Dr. Fenichel.
Can I comment on that?
Yes, please, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, the problem we have nowadays, that our communication system, our internet and what have you, works against us. In the good old days, say in this country, we had 1 or 2 radio stations. Everybody would hear the same news. You could be on the right or on the left, but at least you can have an intelligent discussion about the interpretation of what you heard. Nowadays, you just pick up what you want to listen to. You pick up the channel that has the stuff you want to hear, and it's very difficult to have an intelligent discussion in the modern day because of this extra stuff we have. As opposed to using that to improve ourselves, to teach us not to do it. I'll shut up.
I heard a Holocaust survivor speak maybe 15 years ago here in town. And he wrote a short book. And the one thing that I will never forget, he said, "How do you want me to sign this book?" I said, "I want you to sign what you think is important for everybody to remember." And I never forgot it. He said, "Just remember, this can happen to anyone at any time." And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on today's world and all the things that are going on in the Middle East, including the world, and what kind of political events, or however you want to word it, that are going on today that we need to be aware of to prevent discrimination from occurring again.
Dr. Fenichel?
That's for me. Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry.
well, as I just alluded to the difficulty of doing it nowadays, and it has to be done locally within your school, your elementary school, your neighborhood, and what have you. Stay away from the politicians for all the stuff that you hear that is scary. You know, all over the world, people are elected democratically and they become autocrats. Terrible. They use this high tech in the wrong way.
I have a question for some of the viewers who are watching us via Zoom. Dr. Fenichel, what advice would you give to those who currently experience the tragedy of war?
Experience what?
What advice would you give to those who currently experience the tragedy of war? The people in this person's home country have witnessed the horrors of war on a daily basis. And so they ask, what advice would you give them who are currently experiencing this?
Well, if you're in a war and you're not involved in the fighting, you have no control over it, and you can just say pray for the best. But the work should be done on the politicians to stop it, to the war. I mean, as I said, it makes no sense to me. I'm fortunate that I survived that, but I have no, and I'm not so sure we need to do something about, give me a country or place where you don't have people who fight with each other. I don't know. I have no advice other than on a local level. Within your village, within your town, you can try and develop a peaceful future. I apologize for my sound. I have dentures and they don't work properly every day.
Sound great.
Hi, I hear that you found a wonderful woman in Diana and married her. Were you able to have a family?
I didn't hear that.
Oh,
Dr. Fenichel, this woman here was asking you if you were able to have a family. You met your wonderful wife, Diana. Do you have a family?
Yes, we have a family. We have two daughters. One daughter lives in Canada now. She went to the University of Toronto to get a graduate degree in museum studies. Her husband, a boy in Canada, in Toronto, went to the University of Cincinnati to get a medical degree. They got introduced at some point, but instead of her keeping him in Cincinnati, he took her to his extended family in Toronto. We had two daughters. The other daughter married a high school sweetheart, and they live in Berkeley, California right now. another foreign country.
Dr. Fenichel, I have one,
And we have grandkids, yes.
Dr. Fenichel, what survival mechanisms did you rely on during your time in the concentration camps? What helped you?
Well, we tried to play some games or toys with a few other kids, and we picked up sticks and stones and what have you. And played some games that we may have remembered. I don't remember very much of it. Maybe it's one way that that I'm surviving. I'm purposely ignoring or forgetting stuff that actually happened. Actually, some of it still happens in everyday life, and I'm fortunate that my wife is my memory bank. She helped me out. We've been happily married for 60 some odd years. And her name, by the way, is Diana. She is my Princess Diana.
Hi, thank you so much for talking to us today. My question, so we're seeing some, scary things happen today too with immigrants and things that are going on. So if we're focusing in our community and particularly like in my own home, if there's things that I want to be prepared to try to help people and, not be a bystander, what are some things that we could do to prepare just in our own homes to help other people?
You mentioned something about immigrants and undesirable.
No, sir, I'm sorry. I believe she was saying that we're seeing in today's day and age, xenophobia is ticking back up. And I believe she's wondering what can she do in her own life? What can she do from just as a civilian at home to help individuals who are being discriminated against or potentially persecuted?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we as average citizens can stop some of these terrible things that are happening, but what you can say is it's happening. Try and make the best from what you have, the tools you have, and we'll survive this too. This too shall pass. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I'm fortunate, that I'm able to put some levity in the story. So otherwise I would be crying every day for what happened. I don't have brothers or sisters. My father is gone. I mean, it's terrible what has happened to me. And yet I just can't spend the rest of my life crying. So I try to live with it in some fashion. And when I'm asked to tell the story, I do it the way I just did.
I think we have time for one more.
Thank you very much. I have a question. Do you really, I kind of listening to your story, I believe it was your mother's faith that must have helped you survive in the camp. You had mentioned even keeping a little bit of bread for Shabbat. That sounds like so much that she was able, and her faith was what helped get her and you through this horrible time. Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah.
Like able to celebrate Shabbat?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess she tried whatever she can to just bring me up properly and keep her identity of, she came from a traditional home, and even under this terrible situation, you can celebrate the Shabbat. How do you do it? You don't go to synagogue or you don't have other items, but if you put a little bit of bread on the side, that's the way she did it, which I think is very clever in retrospect. And I, of course, got a little extra to eat on Shabbat, few extra pieces of bread.
Thank you, Dr. Fenichel. Ethan, do you have anything you want to add?
I'm gonna piggyback on that question a little. Even though my grandmother, who was an Auschwitz survivor, did not talk a lot about the Holocaust, she did mention this one time where after her mother had, after her parents were murdered, she, a while later, they were fleeing from a bombardment, and as she was fleeing, she said that she heard her mother's voice, and she went to turn around. And as she turned around, she tripped, and had she gone a few steps further, a mortar shell landed, and she believed that her mother saved her. And that particular example of sort of a spiritual experience in a hostile, traumatic, and violent environment. I guess my question is, were you, especially as a child during this time, were there any experiences to your recollection that played a pivotal role in your own psyche in surviving what you have survived?
I can't think of anything right now off the top of my head. As I said, I was fortunate to have my mother take such good care of me that I was fortunate, you know.
Thank you again so much.
And I would say, and when we came to Israel and I went to local schools or whatever I did, I was always welcome. Partly in Israel at the time, there were many other people who were similar immigrants just like me, so we understood each other. But
Dr. Fenichel, again, from all of us, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please give him a big round of applause.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.